Greetings and salutations, viewers. Welcome to ConnectiCon 2016. We are Inspire the Muse, and we are here with author David Farland. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We are hoping to learn a little bit about your books and some of the incredible stories that you have created over the years.
Okay, well, you know, it's interesting since you're talking about inspiration and what gets you going. You know, I started out as a young person thinking about writing and not doing too much of it when I was a teenager. And
I think we've all been there.
And I had a writing teacher, my English teacher when I was 16, who called me into class one day and said, "Dave, you know, you're a writer and you just don't know it." And I said, "No, I'm not. I'm going to be a doctor." And she said, "No, you don't understand. You can't shut this out. It's just going to take over your life. Someday it'll hit you." And I was in pre-medical microbiology in college. And,
oh, wow.
I always thought I'd be a doctor who maybe did a little bit of writing on the side. And one day I started working on writing some poems. And about a week later, I had to drop out of my pre-med classes. It took over my life, you know. And I guess that a part of me thinks that, you know, to some degree, maybe you're born to be a creative, you know. I write well, I paint well, I sculpt well, just about anything in the creative arts, and I'm no good for anything else. I think that's what it comes down to. But anyway, I started writing in college then. I got excited about writing and began writing my first short stories. And I think one of the things that I did that really worked for me was that I tried to think outside the box. I thought, what is it that I'd like to see that nobody does? And so I was really interested in, at the time, in Latin American fantasy realism, and I was also interested in gritty realism. And so decided I would mix the two, write a story set in the far future that was science fiction, and kind of mix a couple of different genres. And I wrote my first story, On My Way to Paradise, in science fiction. I was basically working as a prize writer at the time, trying to win money in contests so that I could afford to date girls and do things like that, eat.
Not the easiest lifestyle.
No, it's not the easiest lifestyle, but you know, I entered a bunch of contests and I won them all. And
nice.
So I made a lot of money at doing that, and that led to a 3-novel contract with Bantam Books. And so with my contract with Bantam Books, you know, I wrote my first novel, On My Way to Paradise.
Yep.
Won the International Grand Prize for the Writers of the Future with the first couple of chapters, and then won the Philip K. Dick with the full novel. And that just sort of launched my career. I became a bestseller and kind of just kept going.
And it's been uphill ever since.
It has, you know, I've done really well. I wrote science fiction for 10 years. My editor, when I was young, asked me, she said, you know, what do you want to write next? After I wrote On My Way to Paradise, she says, you're a huge bestseller. You've gotten farther in 20 years than most people, you know, farther with one book than most people get in 20 years of writing. And I said, I want to do a big fantasy. And she said, no, you can't write fantasy. You're a best-selling science fiction author. And so for 10 years, I wrote science fiction, but I kept kind of edging towards fantasy. So, you know, you look at my Golden Queen series here, which is science fiction, but it looks more like a fantasy cover than anything else. And that's okay with me, because I thought I'm going to write science fiction with trees in it. So I did those, and then on my 10th anniversary as a writer, I decided I'm going to write that big fantasy novel that I wanted to write. And so I started writing the Rune Lords, and that took off really well. You know, when we get
just a bit.
When we took off in creativity, I mean, what it came down to was I looked at fantasy and I said, you know, I want to do something that feels familiar to readers. And so I went with a medieval fantasy, but I said I want it to twist away from that, so that by the time that you get done reading the second or third book, you realize you've never read a fantasy series like this before. Okay. So I kept going further and further away from the standard fantasy tropes, and I created my own unique magic system, and I started creating my own biological world and taking you farther and farther away from the little kingdom of Harridan into other places, and taking you into the underworld and to the far side of the planet and all sorts of things like that, and just having fun with it.
What was the process like for you in creating a whole new magic system and making it work in your world?
You know, the magic system was the hardest part for me because I started looking at magic systems and I thought, you know, I want something that feels familiar. And as I started studying magic systems, I realized that pretty much all of them had been used in fantasy. Everything from reading goat entrails to peering into fires and pyromancy and ogliomancy with looking into magic stones and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, I really want something new. And I'd had a little argument. I had an employee that did some work for me, and I wanted to pay him $25 an hour, and he only wanted to take 10. And I was like, you're insane, you know? And I got to thinking about the responsibility of an employer to an employee.
Yeah.
And I got to thinking, I want to do something that has to do with economics. And anyway, so I thought about it for a long time. And ultimately, one day, I was driving through Scotland with a friend, and we were just talking, and he said to me something along the line of, he says, can you imagine what this looked like, 2,000 years ago? And I had read a document from an ancient Roman general who was complaining about how terrible the wolves were and the forests and the Scots. He said, we had 40 people who were killed last night by wolves. 38 were drug out of their beds the night before. And he says, and the only thing worse than these wolves are the damn Scots, proud Scot here.
Half Scottish.
Yes, exactly. And so anyway, I remember reading that, and all of a sudden, I just had this kind of a vivid waking dream where I was standing in a hillock in a forest, deep forest all around me, and I could hear horse hooves coming towards me through the forest. And a woman behind me whispered, "Shh, beware, a Rune Lord is coming." And I was like, what's a Rune Lord? And all of a sudden I knew. And I thought, this is really cool. And my magic system just came pouring in from my subconscious. I don't have that kind of thing happen. I don't have hallucinations and flashbacks from the 1960s very often. But, when they came, it came at just the right time. And I thought, this is a really cool magic system. And I went home and was able to sit down and use it to write my my outline for the novel in
That's
about
awesome.
3 days. So sometimes I think what happens is, you ponder a problem for a long time, and your subconscious basically supplies the answer, but it seems to do it in its own time and its own way.
It takes a while.
It does. It takes a while.
But it's worth the wait usually.
It is. Yeah. I mean, for example, when Albert Einstein came up with the theory of relativity, he worked on it for 3 years, and while he was sitting on the toilet one day, it all popped into his head. He finally understood it, okay? He said it was like a revelation, like a light bulb going on that just sent electricity. I got the same thing thinking about my little, silly Rune Lords plot. But you get that kind of a thing. The guys who, Watson and Crick, who did discovered the double helix shape of the DNA, did the same thing. They've been thinking about what's the shape of this for a couple of years, and all of a sudden, one guy steps into an elevator and he's thinking about, gosh, last year there was a big winding stair here, and all of a sudden he goes, a winding stair, that's it. and he had this theory. So I think that creativity is something that comes from the ability of looking at one thing and seeing another, putting things together, putting ideas together, and just playing. William Shakespeare said that there's a couple. He had 3 guys in one of his plays who were talking about writing plays, and one of them says, "The play is the thing," and he uses that. And I think what Shakespeare is saying is, playing with ideas is the thing. That's what allows you to write great fiction, to develop great stories.
I've always equated the creative drive as asking, what if?
What if? Yes.
And then seeking out an answer.
That's it. I mean, that's often a lot of the process. Sometimes, though, for example, you can have a story where you get stuck on a plot and you say, what couldn't possibly happen? well, a train couldn't come crashing through the wall. Well, one could if it derailed down the street, and maybe that's what you should have happen. And so sometimes it's not what if, it's like, well, what couldn't happen? And then you go for that. My way that I like to plot is I like to say, what's the worst thing that could happen? And that's just where I'm going to head.
Yep.
You know, so that's what I like to handle.
For me, it's always been, here's my character. What's the worst thing I can throw at them?
That's right.
And then try and double it.
That's right. Exactly. And you know, it's excruciating for the audience, but it's just fun for the author. You know, your little demonic sensibilities coming into play.
Yep.
I sometimes think that there's a relationship that's going on here. You know, we're the torturers and the audience is the willing victim. You know, and we just have to make sure we play our part well.
Yep. Yeah. So for our viewers out there, are there any upcoming works of yours that you'd like to promote?
I'm finishing the last work in the writers in the Nightingale, or excuse me, in the Rune Lord's universe, called A Tale of Tales, and I probably got about 4 weeks left to finish it up, and I'm going to be taking a writing retreat and just doing it this next month.
Nice.
So that's my goal, is to get that finished up this fall. And then my next books, my Nightingale series, has first book in the series won a number of awards. Hollywood Book Festival for Best Book of the Year, International Book Award for Best Young Adult Novel of the Year. And I've still got 3 books to write in this series, so I'm going to see if I can do some double duty and maybe try to get 2 books written by the end of the year.
Nice.
So those are some of the things I've got going on.
I'll be kind of sad to see the Rune Lord saga wrapping up.
Well, I actually do have a new book in the Rune Lord's universe. I've got actually a series of 3 books that are going to be prequels set nearly 1,000 years before the story's here. And so, I'm having
sold.
a lot of fun. So
I'm already in for it.
I've already got half of it written, so that'll be coming too.
Nice.
Yeah.
And again, for our viewers out there, where can they find all of your works?
Well, you know, a lot of my works can be found, you know, at the bookstores. You can go to my website at www.davidfarland.com. You can go to Wordfire Press and find a number of my books there. I do a lot of different types of things. So.
Great. Thank you for joining us. And we really appreciate it.
Okay.
And to all our viewers out there, thank you for joining us. By all means, go to the YouTube channel or our website, check out all the other interviews and shenanigans we've gotten up to at 2016. And until next time, as always, go be creative.